How did we get to the point where real Americans have to fight for our rights against other people who live among us? People who call themselves Americans but would rather live under a socialist ideology where freedom is non-existent and allowances are given by rulers. These people are around us, sometimes even friends, sometimes family members. What happened to these people? How did they come to believe that we as Americans would be better off handing our power, our leverage, and our rights over to a small group of people whose intentions are to take control over the population? Because of the Democrat Party and a dishonest media, some people have been convinced that it's better to do what government says. They've been taught that their rights come from the government. They get the concept of rights and privileges confused. They're not taught how our country was founded. They're taught to denounce God, and they're even convinced that they are victims of society who are entitled to some sort of reward. They forget that rights come with responsibility and privileges come with obligation. So what is a right? A right is God-given. A right is something that's inherent in being human. A right is something that cannot be taken away because it comes from a higher power. Many on the left have traded God for the higher power of government. This has been achieved by implementing the notion that anything that can't be immediately explained with science doesn't exist and should be denounced. It's a great strategy to make some people denounce their faith and follow the ever-changing scientific method, which is based purely on moment-to-moment hypotheses, in an effort to keep them waiting for the next instruction on how to live their lives, stripping them of the belief that their lives should be driven by their own free will and their own inherent God-given rights. Unfortunately, rights are often violated because those with leverage and the need for power understand there's a group of people who will follow along and do what they're told out of fear of being ostracized by their peers. So what's a privilege? A privilege is man-made. Privilege is something that's given and can be taken away. Privileges are often used as leverage. Privileges are used to get people to do something or prevent them from doing something. But there's a clear distinction between rights and privileges. Unfortunately, many in our society have blurred those definitions. But this wasn't an accident. This was a clear strategy implemented by an anti-gun, anti-freedom ideology that comes from the political left. Unfortunately, there are many who gravitate toward that ideology who can't think for themselves and would rather be told what to do. They also believe that they can tell you what to do. The Second Amendment says you have the right to keep and bear arms without infringement. It doesn't say you have the right to keep and bear arms unless someone who's scared of guns doesn't want you to. It doesn't say you have the right to keep and bear arms unless your government employees think they know better for you. When communists are able to gather enough power and rule over entire populations, the strategy of convincing weak-minded people that it's best for them to go along while strong-arming others by removing their ability to stand up and defend themselves is key and must be implemented. In America, we have a group of ill-minded people who are trying desperately to do exactly that. Their voices can be heard loud and clear, and their intentions are unmistakable. The ideology of the radical left is to make good people submissive in the quest for leverage and domination. Their problem is the radical voices on the left have spoken too soon. They've let their secret out too early. They were able to keep their dreams of communism quiet for a while, but eventually they became too eager to express their real intentions. Now they're in the political fight of their lives, and they have to cheat, steal, and lie to retain political leverage because Americans are finally on to them. This was all supposed to go smoothly for them, but they made one mistake. They were supposed to get the guns first. Real Americans are now standing up and letting the radicals know that they didn't get the guns and they never will. So how are the socialist and communist sympathizers living among us so easily convinced to go along with the idea that being unarmed and defenseless is a good condition to be in? How are people able to see violent crime on the streets of our American cities and still decide that they themselves are better off without a gun to protect themselves? How do these people support the idea that guns are the problem when they see people in the most highly gun-restricted areas of our country being killed in huge numbers because they've been rendered helpless? How do they ignore the fact that 2.5 million lives are saved every year in America because the potential victim or someone nearby was armed? How do they support the empowerment of women while simultaneously disarming them, even when they know that 46% of those defensive gun uses are by women? How does the political left ignore the fact that 90% of violent criminals avoided background checks altogether when acquiring firearms? How do they continue to believe that background checks stop the bad guys when 95% of background check denials are false positives, preventing good people from defending themselves? And how do they push for more gun-free zones when they see their policies putting good people at risk? They're able to hold on to their anti-gun beliefs amidst all the contradicting data for two reasons: fear and hate. Anti-gunners have been convinced that guns cause people to do bad things. In other words, the gun made him do it. They take free will out of the equation and place the blame of violence on an inanimate object. They turn violent killers into victims of society while blaming the gun. They make the gun the culprit because they've been cultivated to fear them. They believe gun violence actually exists, while human violence is a result of the gun. There's no such thing as gun violence. What we're really talking about is human violence. But the anti-gun fear campaign has been strategically implemented and perpetuated to create an irrational fear of guns by those who can't think for themselves. Which is why anytime a violent act is committed and a gun is involved, the first thing the media does is roll the AR-15 across the TV screen. The focus is always on the gun and never on the person pulling the trigger, because the fear needs to be directed toward the thing they want to get rid of. So what about hate? Have you noticed how the anti-gun crowd constantly stands on the graves of dead children to push their anti-gun position? They capitalize on deaths in schools to push for more gun restrictions. They completely ignore the fact that the 1990 Gun-Free School Zones Act, which was introduced by Joe Biden, has resulted in double the amount of school killings since, because innocent people have been rendered unarmed and helpless. On what planet does it make sense to bus thousands of children to schools across the country every day, keep them in the schools for 8 hours a day, remove all forms of armed security, including teachers and staff who could, in many circumstances, be very capable of protecting their students, and then post signs on the buildings advertising that everyone inside is unarmed and helpless? It's illogical, but the people who support these policies are unable to critically think this topic through, because they've been convinced by politicians and media outlets that making teachers and students vulnerable to attacks is okay as long as they support their anti-gun position. When real Americans speak out against gun-free zones and demand that people have the right to defend themselves, the left calls us reckless and claims we're intentionally trying to put people in danger. They ignore the fact that the policies they support are the actual cause of death, while building a hatred and anger toward gun owners and the Second Amendment. The anti-gun crowd is being manipulated by the media, which uses their own emotions against them to create an irrational fear of guns and a hatred toward anyone who supports gun ownership. They've been misled, and they don't even know it. Anti-gun lobbying groups like Moms Demand Action in every town can literally watch children and teachers get killed in schools and still push for more of the dangerous gun restrictions that caused the problem in the first place. They understand how to fix the problem. They understand that the reason people are getting killed is because they're unarmed and helpless, but they don't care. They believe in the philosophy that you must break a few eggs to make an omelet. In other words, a few must die to achieve their ultimate outcome. What's the ultimate outcome? Gun-free America, where Democrats control the people and the people are unarmed. Anti-gun lobbying groups would rather see the death numbers go up so they can push for more gun restrictions. The problem is, they don't live in Venezuela. They don't live in communist China. They live in America. The Constitution was written to protect real Americans from socialists, communists, anarchists, and left-wing radicals who want to destroy the very freedom our country was built on. The good news is, real Americans will put a stop to it. Our founding fathers could see tyranny coming over 200 years away, which is why the Second Amendment was written. They knew the power of the firearm. and the leverage it brought in preserving freedom against men who believed they were superior and could make decisions for everyone. What they may not have known is there would be a massive amount of weak-minded, fearful souls unwilling to stand for their own families and communities. People who are comfortable being told what to do. Did they know those people would oppose the idea of freedom because they wouldn't want to risk their reputations or livelihood? Isn't it ironic how the American spirit, bravery, and strength has been systematically demonized at the same time modern-day tyrants seek control of the people? Is it unusual that many who should be willing to stand up for their rights are instead being softened and conditioned to embrace victimhood? We look back to our founders and thank them for what they did because we know how important our freedom is to us today, and we know the bravery they had that seems to be lost on many today. They weren't afraid of offending their opposition. They certainly weren't interested in complying or conforming to rules and regulations that were designed to limit their freedom and give power to rulers. They'd experienced that and weren't about to let it happen again. It's easy to look back on history and see revolutionaries as warriors and heroes willing to do whatever they had to do to be free. It's easy to see them as titans fighting for a noble cause against all odds. It's all true, but they were just normal people of their time doing what they knew was right, just like us. How will future generations look back at us? Will they ask why we let our rights slip away, or will they revere us and thank us for protecting their freedom? Will we teach our future generations that government knows best and we should always do what we're told? Or will we renew the power in our descendants and teach them by example that freedom is given by God and no man has the right to take that away? I know I'm watching history in the making. To all my fellow patriots, I thank you for protecting my grandkids, my great-grandkids, and all future generations to come. You're noble, you're righteous, and you are the embodiment of the American spirit. Thank you.